Hey folks, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever this podcast episode may be finding you. And for those of you in the future, please no spoiler alerts. So today we're going to be talking to Justin Moon, who's a developer on Bitcoin, and we're going to be talking about a variety of topics, specifically his journey and his, now that he is actually educating people and how to learn how to build on Bitcoin, which is pretty interesting. But before we get to the main episode, let's give a little thanks to our sponsor. So the first one is eToro. The best way to be smart about trading crypto and Bitcoin is to use the smartest trading platform. And that's why I'm excited to talk to you about eToro. eToro is one of the largest trading platforms in the world with over a 1 trillion trading volume on the platform per year. And US customers can now trade the most popular crypto and traditional assets with extraordinarily low and transparent fees. And if you're not ready to trade yet, practice building your portfolio, practice your strategies with the eToro virtual trading feature, which allows you to trade and practice strategies with, well, as it sounds like, virtual money. So it's actually money that you can just play around with, and this way you don't actually, if you're going to be trying out a new trading strategy or a way that you want to invest, you can actually practice it beforehand. So if it makes money, then you know that it may be worthwhile pursuing further, and if not, then you can learn from your mistakes, but you can learn virtually without your real money being at risk. And best of all, you can connect with 11 million other eToro traders around the world that discuss trading charts and all things in the Bitcoin space. So create an account today at eToro. Go to didyouknowcrypto.com/eToro. That's didyouknowcrypto.com/eToro. And just so that we're all on the same page, there's no promises of future returns. Bitcoin and just any sort of trading of assets is highly volatile and can change any minute. So you need to have your own risk portfolio and a risk management program before you get involved in anything like that. Next, I would like to ask if you guys could please go over to iTunes, leave a 5-star and a written review, and go over to supportmypodcast.com, where you guys can see the different ways to support the podcast. But if you click on the discount link in there, you can find discounts on things like Trezors and KeepKey hardware wallets, Mushroom Coffee, as well as artwork and different types of Bitcoin shirts and related apparel and all that kind of good stuff, and that's absolutely free. So supportmypodcast.com. That's supportmypodcast.com. And last of all, I'd really like to thank everybody listening. You guys make all of this possible. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it, and enjoy the show. I'd like to welcome Justin Moon, developer, entrepreneur, and educator who runs the BUIDL Bootcamp, which teaches you from the ground up how to develop on Bitcoin. Justin, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So I've been listening to quite a few interviews that you've done so far, and you're pretty new actually to Bitcoin. Can you kind of tell me and everyone listening about your journey and how Bitcoin found you?
Yeah, so let's see where to start there. I got interested in it in the maniacal bull run like 2 years ago, just a little bit. I've been familiar with it for a while. I looked into Ethereum like before it even launched as like an app development platform, not as an investment. So it never occurred to me that I should buy the coin. I just thought, this might be an interesting way to write apps because I was a programmer. Tried to write one, didn't make sense. I gave it up. But I was always aware of Bitcoin from that point of view. But my impression was that it was something for people who, I thought the problem it was solving was when PayPal shuts your account down, right? And I'm like, well, I don't have that problem. I don't do many sketchy things. PayPal's probably not going to shut me down. If they do, I'll look into it. So I just sort of wrote it off for years with that in the back of my head. And it wasn't until kind of after this bull run, first off, I realized it could go mainstream, which is I always assumed it couldn't. And the reason was just like greed. People would try to kind of monetize it, or people would try view it as an investment, and that could make it grow a lot. And then finally, I realized that the problem it was solving was not PayPal shutting your account down. The problem was, I guess there's a few. The big one that never occurred to me was that our money currently is flawed. In particular, it's inflates like crazy, and that's just a structural characteristic of the way our money is designed. And Bitcoin is designed to not do that. And so when I kind of realized that it was addressing a fundamental problem with the way our the global economy is sort of organized, I became a lot more interested and realized there was that it was solving a bigger problem than what I originally envisioned. And then I got into this sort of more cypherpunk, reading the Nakamoto Institute and stuff like that, and I realized there was a lot of sort of intellectual firepower behind it, and it was really an idealistic movement, not some sort of degenerate thing or thing for nerds. It was like really trying to give people freedom. And so all those things combined to make me dive in a little over a year ago. And I went in pretty hard. So I immediately took, Jimmy Song's programming blockchain class, went into the first conference I could, we did a hackathon there. We won the hackathon, which was really cool. I made a lot of friends. And so I just sort of went deeper and deeper in the rabbit hole. And maybe 4 or 5 months after I got started, I announced this BUIDL Bootcamp class just to sort of address some of the issues I saw as a programmer getting into Bitcoin. It was just hard to understand how it works and how to work with the protocol, how the protocol works and how to work with the protocol. Just because there's a lot involved. You have to know networking. You have to know some cryptography. You're working with there's just a number of little issues when you sort of approach it, and so that was what I was trying to address. I just made it free to begin with, but there was a ton of demand. Like a couple hundred people signed up for the first one, and slowly started charging for it. And now it's a business been sustaining me for the last 10 or so months. And I've been starting to expand sort of beyond it, trying to make my BUIDL Bootcamp more and more advanced, and make some new offerings that are more aimed at people who are earlier in their journey. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
And this may be, I think it's one of the more interesting questions in Bitcoin, and that is, to you, what is Bitcoin?
To me, it's cash, it's money. It's not like it's sort of all these properties of money at the same time. It's really good as a medium of exchange, right? Like I've had people try to take my class. Like there was this Indian kid a while ago. He tried like every credit card he had. That India has is a very different credit card system, and it's less developed than in the West. And so every one of the some of them were declined. Some of his attempts were declined by his bank. Some were declined by Stripe, and so he just couldn't pay. And then all of a sudden, he tries Bitcoin, and it's like boom, 6 confirmations. He just paid me from India, and paid like 50 cents, and we had to wait an hour. Just like unbelievable medium of exchange that works in many circumstances that other mediums of exchange do not work. It's really, really good for like a store of value. This idea that you have. It's really hard to wrap your head around digital scarcity, right? It's like you can copy a file on your computer over and over again. And how many times have we done that? But all of a sudden we have this like thing where I cannot copy my coins as much as I'd like to. I got my 1 Bitcoin here. I can't copy it and make 2 and 3. And it's just like such a remarkable achievement. And this property of like a true cap on a fungible good, right, is never been seen before. Like, yeah, there's only one Mona Lisa, but it's not fungible. There's not a lot of them. But Bitcoin, there's trillions and trillions of Satoshis, and they're not going to be more than the cap, which is just like unbelievable. So yeah, I just look at it as money. Like very simply, it's just money, and it's true like commodity free market money that just emerged, right? And I think emergent phenomena are the really interesting ones, where you don't have sort of a designer at the top who's trying to assert their kind of omniscience to design how the world should work. No, it's one of these things that emerges through the interplay of like all humans, and so I think in that sense it's like a very powerful. It's like a movement where you have these people acting independently of their own self-interest, and collectively they bring this thing into being. So it's really a interesting phenomena. I think, I mean, we haven't really seen an asset monetize in thousands of years, like naturally, right? Like gold was the most recent one. So it's really one of those things where you're sort of grateful to be alive to see this, because it's not something that happens very often, and it's been happening for the last 10 years, and we're all alive to see it.
Your prior to you mentioned that kind of your first um, introduction was the bull run, and then you kind of I'm guessing that you heard about like Ethereum and dApps, and that kind of is what got you in there. But what was your, I guess, kind of political philosophy prior to 2017 when you first became aware of it? Was the inherent value of Bitcoin and what it represents? Did your political philosophy kind of draw you towards Bitcoin, or has Bitcoin changed that? It's always kind of interesting to hear, everybody's stories, because there's a lot of different stories that people have, and sometimes it's their political philosophy, especially if you talk to people that kind of got involved in the 2011, 12, 13 time frame was a lot of political type folks.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2017 was a little bit different, but I'm just wondering kind of what drew you to Bitcoin, and if it's changed your mind on anything.
Yeah, well, I should qualify. I've been aware of it for like 5 or 6 years. I mean, I have the white paper bookmarked since like 2013. I never read it, unfortunately, but like I was aware of it for a long time, but I just never engaged. I engaged much more deeply with Ethereum because it was more understandable to me as an app development platform. And yeah, I took it seriously when this last bull market came out, because it just destroyed my assumptions. Like the thing I assumed it was not acting like the thing I assumed it was. So I had to dive in a little more deeply. My view on politics has always been, I find it like disgusting and very distasteful. So I never participate in politics. I don't vote. I've just always steered clear. And in my generation, like people who are coming of age when Obama was around, this is an unpopular point of view. So I really never had not a point of view, but inclination. It's not really what my peers were doing. So I always just sort of steered clear of politics, and I didn't really know why. And I think Bitcoin's helped me understand why I never liked it to begin with. It's really like a violence game. You have this apparatus of the state which monopolizes violence, and you get these really it becomes like a bare knuckle fight for who can claim that weapon and use it to their own benefit. So I think that's what I always found distasteful about it. Like I always was not impressed by the politicians. They seemed like really sketchy characters, but I didn't know why. And Bitcoin's kind of helped me have a new view of politics, and yeah, I mean, in a sense, like I sort of view Bitcoin as the only like political thing I've ever done. Like I view it as a sort of a I mean, it is. This is a tough how to exactly say this, but it is like sort of a political movement in the sense where it's explicitly trying to remove one of the fundamental sort of like motive forces of the modern state, which is the money printer, right? Like I really don't think you can. Like some people don't like to talk about, like liberals or the progressives in particular don't like to admit that, but it's like very clearly that's what it's designed to do. It's and Satoshi has some sort of quotes about this. Like I saw one recently. It's very appealing from the libertarian point of view is one of his quotes, and so it's like very clearly that like that's what it is, and so. So yeah, I think it is sort of, the way I view my involvement in Bitcoin is somewhat like activism, where like based on purely self-interest, I'd probably just go work at a high-paying job and just stack sats. But I think it's such an important movement that I sort of engage in a little bit of activism and try to, contribute to the movement rather than just personally benefiting from it.
No, absolutely. I completely agree that that Bitcoin is itself a just by participating in the network is a political act in a way, and just by supporting it as well, because it, it is difficult, like you said. It's hard to kind of quantify it, but Bitcoin is not necessarily, it's not overtly political in that it's not overtly political in its kind of on the face of it, but just what its actions are, and kind of the ripple effects are extremely political and philosophical as well in a lot of ways. But yeah, it is. I think I know the kind of sentiment that you're talking about with a lot of people, younger people just not interested in participating in kind of the traditional political systems that our parents and grandparents grew up with, which was attending rallies. And it's not to say that there aren't a lot of the people of I'd say probably the 40 or 30 and under that don't do that, but I think it's becoming less and less popular, and things that are more of actions that you can take are becoming more and more popular with kind of actual political activity, and I think Bitcoin is one of them. And
I don't know.
that kind of
I'd kind of disagree
okay.
with that. Like, I think it's becoming more and more popular. Like, just people love getting out, and like, there's so many like rallies and marches now. Like, there wasn't a march for the first 100 years of American history, and now there are like marches all the time, like inspired by being pissed off about the president's tweets. Like, there's so much. I think there's just I think it's just because, like, my generation. My point is, they're becoming like overwhelmed. They're just becoming like dedicated to this idea of like partisan political action, and just obsessed with the president. Like, and so that's what I always felt uncomfortable with, is like, that's kind of how my peers were very engaged in the 2008 election, 2012 election, the last one. And I was like, what, man, doesn't seem important. But I agree that I don't think that's a way to actually make an impact. Like, I think these people who engage at that level have zero impact. They're not changing anything. They're pawns.
No, absolutely. Yeah, they are being used by individuals who decide to tweak the antennas in a way where it picks up a signal that they'll respond to, but in the end, it's not in their best interest.
And
And
one other thing I was going to say that I just want to, sorry to interrupt, but I want to say before I forget, is that so like I think I mean, myself and many other people, I think, in Bitcoin weren't political beforehand, and sort of maybe that part of them, or they found a way to engage through Bitcoin, and I think in a similar sense to like people's obsession with like politics is on the other side, is like capitalism and trade, right? So I always was more pulled to business, capitalism, trade, and everything, but I always found that slightly distasteful as well. Like many of my peers, many of my peers are just like hate capitalism and want to escape from it. They think it's like it's evil. And I think Bitcoin helped me realize that it's not like this. So the things that I didn't like about business as I saw it practice was not trade as such. It was the kind of crony system that the state, that capitalists in the past have erected around trade in order to protect themselves, and that's the thing about capitalism as it's practiced today that I think myself and many people find repulsive. And so that's another thing that I think Bitcoin can really help with, is if you have a medium of exchange that is eventually very difficult to censor and very difficult to track, if it becomes private and remains censorship resistant, I think that's going to really improve and also makes it harder for the government to fund itself with all these ridiculous regulatory capture regimes that characterize it. I think that can help bring us back to like true laissez-faire capitalism, which is sort of what spawned the Industrial Revolution, why the West is rich, all the kind of the great things about the world as it is. I think we can sort of hopefully rediscover that engine of prosperity, hopefully Bitcoin can help us kind of return in that direction, rather than continue on our current course of more and more basically government mediated trade, which just destroys wealth, because all these exchanges that individuals would want to do are prevented by all volumes and volumes of obscure laws that some lobbyists got passed 30 years ago.
No, absolutely. I think that there's a major disconnect between. It's one of the reasons that I don't like to use the term capitalism, and as far as for what I support, because if you look at the definitions, I mean, crony capitalism actually meets the definitions of capitalism, and that's why I prefer the term free market. But then that becomes like kind of like a quibbling thing, and then you start to fall into the same issue of like real socialism has never been tried. But I think that a lot of people equate the crony, just corrupt system, or system that has become corrupted that we live in today, as kind of what is advocated as free markets. And I agree, as you said, that Bitcoin is a system that is purely a free market. There's no middlemen. There's no there's no stopping of trade in between, of transferring value from one individual to another. And I think that for a lot of people, that's kind of why they were attracted to it and in the first place. And it's really interesting for me to hear that you kind of were not political. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing that it was more of the realization that what you thought was not possible prior to was actually possible, kind of is what brought you into Bitcoin, and that realization that people are actually valuing something and as money, as digital cash, that you thought was just kind of a niche side project.
Yeah, I mean, I just never really understood the role that I don't think anybody understands the role that cash plays. Like they just assume it's I don't know. It's like if you get some disease, then all of a sudden you realize you have a liver and what it's supposed to do, right? But until you have the disease, you're like completely unaware of your liver, and until you get the liver disease, right? For the crappy example. And so like money's the same way. It's like you don't realize what a fundamental technology money is to civilization until it starts to go horribly wrong. And even then, you look at any one of you can practically look at any graph of economic activity and like chart it from 1950, and it's like, wow, something really bad happened in early 1970s, right? And it's true on like every one of these graphs, like inequality, like kind of income inequality, like national debt, a lot of these things. It's like there's like a weird thing happened in the early 70s, and obviously went off the gold standard. Money became like this like subjective thing you could create more of, instead of something that was like hard and had to be in a sense earned by really producing it, right? Like production of money no longer, it just was like automatic. It was a button. And I still think that the mainstream economics profession does not, I think they're just completely blind to how important money is, and its role in an economy. And and I think that's been the motivating thing here, is like, wow, if we fix, that's the Bitcoin fixes this meme, right? It's like underneath everything is money, and if you have bad money, you're just going to have disease everywhere. But if you don't, if you do have good money, then all of a sudden you get healthier, and that's sort of the thing that keeps me. That's the reason I can't really work on anything else, unfortunately.
So yeah, tell us about the BUIDL Bootcamp, and what does it offer? Who can sign up and learn kind of the prereqs? Or are there any kind of prerequisites that people should kind of know before they jump in?
Yeah, the idea with BUIDL Bootcamp is that you should be kind of an intermediate programmer. beforehand. I try to keep the actual code part of it as simple as possible. The idea is like Bitcoin is complex ideas. The protocol is complicated, the different moving parts like mining, transactions like signatures, cryptography, network protocol, all these things. There's so many moving parts. In order to kind of hold it all into your head, help the student hold it all in their head and see the big picture, I try to keep the code part of it as simple as I can. So like focus on the ideas, not on like writing really fancy, performant, beautiful code. So that's the idea. Is if you've done like maybe a beginning and maybe an intermediate Python course. Python is a popular programming language. Then you're ready for BUIDL Bootcamp. And if you DM me on Twitter, just search Justin Moon. I'll happily point you to some good resources. And I noticing that there were a lot of hodlers interested in enrolling in my class, I also created this thing called Mooniversity. It's on mooniversity.io. It's a kind of a learn to code class focused on Bitcoin. So all the examples involve Bitcoin. So one interesting example is that when we're learning how to do loops, right? And a computer program, one of the reasons why it can be so powerful is you can just say, computer program, do this 1 billion times, and it will be able to do it 1 billion times, and no human can do that. Or you can give it a condition, right? Like for every block in the blockchain, right? Do something, and it will go through every block in the blockchain and do something. So that's the idea of a loop. And so when we're learning loops, one of the things we do is we try to sort of graph out Bitcoin's monetary policy, right? Well, the question is, well, how many halvenings will there be? And so we write a little computer program that will, takes the 2 rules of the 3 rules of the monetary policy, right? There's 100 million Satoshis per coin. There's 21 million coins. And the rule is every, 510,000 blocks? No, that's not right. It's like 210,000 blocks or so. Every 4 years, the rate of new coins issued is cut in half, and that starts at 50. So it's like a couple little variables, kind of like a high school level math problem. We wrote a little computer program that can do a loop and just divides the monetary policy until it reaches just 1 Satoshi issued per block, and then I think it's like 33 or 34 halvenings. So it's kind of cool. It's like in learning about how a loop works, it's like you get this really interesting perspective on the Bitcoin monetary policy. And everyone who goes through it is like, damn, this monetary policy is really front loaded, right? We're at 85% issued after 10 years. So I think it gives you a sense that, that we're kind of late in the game in Bitcoin's monetary policy. And I think, a lot of people don't quite realize that many coins have been issued and there are so few left to be issued. So like this is an example. This is thing I try to do is frame the examples in a way that makes sort of like leverage people's interest in Bitcoin to red pill them on programming. Because I think programming is a very useful skill in the modern world. It gives you independence because you can have a remote job from anywhere as a programmer. It pays well. It's easy to get a job. So it's like you always have this call option in your back pocket where you can just, or like a get out of jail free card where you can just go and make like $100,000 a year as a programmer. So if you get into, it just allows you to be more risk taking. If you can just go and play this card, if you get into trouble, I think it's always good to have sort of like a card like that in your back pocket. It gives you sovereignty and more kind of sort of personal strength. So this is sort of why I promote it a lot. And so yeah, after you take the Mooniversity, you might want to practice a little bit more, but then you're probably ready for BUIDL Bootcamp. And yeah, it's kind of a lot of stuff. And let me just go over some of the stuff we learned there. So like there's sort of 4 parts to BUIDL Bootcamp. The first part is learning how the protocol works. So we write like a little program that implements all the main ideas in Bitcoin. So it has like transactions, it has mining, it has consensus, right? So you can have multiple chains that are competing, hashing, and every node will follow the best chain. And this is actually really hard to implement. You have to say, well, what do I do when I get a new, better chain? You got to like go walk backwards in time, find the shared block that they both have, and then go walk forwards on the better chain. And there's all these little things as we're sort of building this little program, you're able to sort of hold all of Bitcoin in your head at once, which is I think a great experience. and something that defies many people who study Bitcoin. It's like, just as you have a good sense of mining, then like you totally forget what the cryptography is. And so in this little sort of simulation, you're sort of able to hold a lot of it in your head at once. And we start with like a really simple joke coin. It's called PNG coin. Every coin's a photograph. So it's like it's a total joke. And we just iteratively add Bitcoin features until it's kind of the real thing. So that's the first part. And the second part, we work with the network protocol, how all the different, 10 or 100,000 nodes on the network, they send these little messages back and forth to each other to help people do initial block download, to broadcast transactions, to propagate new blocks, to serve the light clients like SPV or Neutrino, all these little messages that are involved in the operation of the Bitcoin network. We learn to kind of send and receive them when they're useful, that sort of thing. And this, it kind of gives a nice insight into how the internet works, because with Bitcoin, you're working with the raw TCP protocol. This is like the protocol that is underneath HTTP that you use to access websites and stuff. So you really learn how the websites you used are sort of loaded over the internet, which is, I think, very interesting. And lastly, we build like 6 or 7 little wallets that are progressively more complicated, and explore different ways to access the blockchain and to compose and sign transactions, culminating with a hardware wallet that you can sort of have a Bitcoin core node that can prepare a transaction, send it over to the hardware wallet. The hardware wallet will sign it, send it back over your USB wire. So it's really fun, and we're able to write this in the simple programming language of Python, which is really great. So after that, you have a much better understanding of how your hardware wallet works, what checks it should be using, and some of the shortcomings of products on the market. After sort of going through this exercise, our wallet's far from perfect, but you can kind of go use a ledger or something and be like, there are places that the ledger makes some questionable assumptions, or like, for example, Trezor, when it's displaying change addresses, it just basically the host machine will send over kind of a template saying this is change, and the Trezor just kind of trusts it. And so there's a bunch of these little nuances involved in using hardware wallets you have a better understanding of once you attempt to build a simple one yourself. So that's the kind of the BUIDL Bootcamp program, and it's been pretty good. We have like 150 people go through it so far. So they're starting to get jobs out in the ecosystem, contributing to a lot of projects. So it's been a fun ride so far.
In your opinion, what is lacking in kind of the development space in Bitcoin right now? Is it just bodies? Is it just a larger swath of people for kind of differing opinions, or what do you think? I've heard in other interviews with other developers that they just say we need more people, but I was just wondering what your take on that was.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is it depends from what perspective you're viewing it. Like, as just a pure free market phenomena, I think you probably have the right number of Bitcoin developers, and there's not a lot of there's not a lot of profit opportunity at the moment, given the current market size, for sort of like forming new Bitcoin ventures, right? Like, I think given the current market size, we probably have enough developers, but like, I am a huge bull, so I think it's going to change the world. So of course, like, if I sort of put on my projection of what we need to get where I think we'll be in 20 years, it's like, okay, we need like 500 times more, like 1,000 times more developers of every type. And so it's sort of important, from which perspective are you viewing this question? So I think in terms of like, to really moon, we need a lot more people. I think the biggest one, I think we just need like better interfaces, more usable products, more like interface designers, and just like nice usable products for normies. Because we got, most of the history of Bitcoin has been, people who are programmers using it, and the people who aren't are using it very poorly, right? If they keep their coins, they're probably some luck involved, right? They don't really know what they're doing. They just know this is so important that they're willing to take risks to participate, or maybe they don't even know they're taking risks. And so I think that's a big thing we need is, we need some of these people who aren't like the sort of the hackers that got Bitcoin off the ground, that are, can make it usable for the masses. And I think that's something that Square is trying to bring to the table with their Square Crypto initiative. So I really look forward to that. I think just more usable products is the really big thing we need. And on the other side, we do probably want a lot more protocol developers, the people actually working on Bitcoin Core, the protocol itself. Having like this chain split, or this inflation bug, was it a year ago? It was like pretty alarming. It wasn't exploited, but that's very alarming. And I don't know. Anytime you try, like I've been recently building a multi-sig UI that connects directly to Bitcoin Core, and as you do, there's like all these, it's just clear that piece of software has so much. It could grow in so many ways. It's still like a very low level, annoying process to work with, like the Bitcoin script language. So something like Miniscript is something Peter Woolidge just made to make this easier. So there's all these innovations at that lower level to make the programming experience more like making a website than like writing an operating system. So you want it, sort of like make it so you don't have to dig as deep to accomplish something interesting.
And okay, so this is perfect because that was one of the things I've mentioned a few times on different episodes is over the last few years is that Bitcoin, I think that, and this isn't meant to be like disrespectful or anything, I think that there's a kind of, it's very engineer heavy.
Totally.
In the overall thought process. Yeah, in the overall thought process in the space. And there's that dance. I'm sure you're aware of it in the aesthetics, kind of UX, UI, and then the back end development. And I think there's an issue sometimes with, I know engineers, not necessarily in the traditional side, civil, and a lot of times they don't understand kind of the I guess consumer trends and kind of the wants of the public, the simplicity that the average Joe wants in a lot of these things. And I think for something like I don't want to use this, but Wasabi, which I use and I like a lot, but it's not very newbie friendly at all.
Sure. Yeah, it's clearly built by engineers.
Yeah, and
which is why it works. Like Wasabi actually works, right? If there weren't killer engineers involved, it wouldn't work. But you can sort of tell that the interface was created by engineers, and this is true across the ecosystem, I think.
Yeah, and I interviewed Adam, and I like it. It works. It works fine. Like I just watched like a YouTube tutorial. And like, okay, no, I get it, right? But it's whereas like if you go to like the Amazon app, and like Wasabi or any kind of Bitcoin app, like they want you to use Bitcoin, make it easy to either buy, sell, or trade, or whatever it may be, or hold and send. Depends on what we're talking about. Amazon, they want you to buy things, and their app is very easy. They make it very simple for you to find the things that you want, add it to the cart, click, and it's going to be on its way to your house. So, from your experience and in your opinion, how do we bridge this gap of the kind of the technical engineers and kind of the EQ, the emotional intelligent kind of I guess kind of more front end. How do we bridge that gap to kind of make it so that the average person on the street, and I'm not talking about the 60-year-olds, because by the time that Bitcoin comes around, it's going to be kind of past their time. But when we're talking about the people who are 30 now, when they're in 10 years when they're 40, and they're kind of used to these certain kind of very easy apps, how do we bridge this gap to make it very easily accessible to use? Because once it's easy to use, it's a lot easier to convince people to actually, use it.
Yeah. So from my own experience, getting to the point where you have to build like a technically usable machine of like like code as a machine kind of, you just, in order to get it to work, you have to like focus on the nuts and bolts so much that you lose empathy with the person who will use it. And you have to, basically, because the technical problems get difficult, and you can't, you just have to start looking at things very literally, making sure they actually work, making sure there aren't errors when there shouldn't be, this sort of thing. And so, I mean, the answer with this in like every sort of software development context is you get specialization, and you get people who focus on, various parts of the machine, and then somebody who focuses on the sort of the face of the machine, right? How people interact with it. And yeah, I mean, in order to build teams this size, you need like viable business models. And outside of the exchange space and maybe hardware wallets, these business models don't exist in Bitcoin largely. At least they haven't yet. There aren't many profitable companies, and there's a lot of companies that have gone, have lost money. So, like it's very hard to make a wallet company make money on it, right? Like it sort of ends up just being open source groups, and it's just hard to get the necessary, degree of specialization in order to have a great user interface and reliable software. It's usually someone who's more of a jack of all trades that can do it more or less by themselves. So that, I mean, I think the answer is you just like, the industry just needs to grow, and you need more of these business models to open up so you can support larger teams. And that's sort of the tragedy of Bitcoin in a sense. It's like, well, one of the strong things about Bitcoin is it's this like completely open source, permissionless system. But that's sort of one of the tricky things about Bitcoin is, it's open and you can copy it and you can scam people, and that's where the money is. So, a lot of people do that instead of helping Bitcoin, or instead of trying to like build businesses on it. So I don't know. I think it's just going to take some time before some of these easy scams and cheap tricks stop working, and people start building like real Bitcoin businesses that aren't just pure on ramps that do Bitcoin as part of it, but more focused on other things. I just think it's going to take some time to really have an ecosystem of Bitcoin companies, and that's when the user interfaces will get good. So I think they'll probably stay shitty for a while, just because it's hard to make money doing these things at the current moment. But luckily, I don't think Bitcoin really needs to have great interfaces in any time in the next 5 years. Like it can, just the monetary properties alone make it so compelling that I think there's quite a few people who aren't currently exposed financially to it that will realize they ought to. So that's kind of my point of view. It'll take some time, but I don't think it's strictly speaking necessary.
It's one of the things I think that those of us in this space kind of fall into is that we want the inevitable future, or I shouldn't say inevitable, right? Because it's not necessarily, nothing's inevitable, but what we believe based on the evidence at hand to be, Bitcoin's future to be that we want it, we can see it clearly, so we want it, to happen quickly, and I think that we actually have made a lot of leaps and bounds, and the fact that if you look at it from the viewpoint of that you mentioned earlier in the interview, that this is kind of the first time we've created that a new iteration of money has been created in a very long time, and we're only 10 years in, and there has been so many leaps and bounds, because I remember just back in 2013, using a Bitcoin wallet was going to bitcoin.org, downloading the full wallet, downloading the full history of the blockchain on Bitcoin. And while it's still, when you download it now, it still looks the exact same as it did then. It's very simple, I guess. It's very 2000s and its design. But if you look at all the different products that are out there, we have made quite a bit of leaps and bounds in that aspect, and I guess there's a element of patience that needs to be element of patience that we need to have in here. And you are also doing a HODL bootcamp on top of the BUIDL Bootcamp, and the HODL Bootcamp, from what I understand, is not really as technically you don't need to have as many prerequisites technically. If you could kind of talk a little, or as much as you like, about what the HODL Bootcamp is, who should be looking at it, what they need to know beforehand, and what they're going to get out of it.
Yeah. So as we were talking about, like one, you want people to be able to use Bitcoin effectively. And so there's two ways to do it. One, you can build better products that are easier to use. And alternatively, you can teach people to use the imperfect products that exist. So HODL Bootcamp is an attempt at the latter, an attempt to teach people who don't feel they know how to effectively use open source Bitcoin wallets built by engineers imperfectly, but they do work. Wallets like Bitcoin Core or Electrum or Wasabi teach people how to install these things. And installation is tricky because most of us, when we install software, we just do it sort of blind, and we just hope that we actually installed what we wanted to install. And many of us end up installing malware as a result, because we're not really checking that the code we're running on our computer is actually what we intended to. And most people don't know how to do that. So I try to focus a little bit on this process, making sure that you are actually installing what you want to install, because it's very important when we're dealing with Bitcoin. If you install you can go and look at, like, search Electrum lost coins or something on Google, and you find all these threads of people who accidentally installed the wrong thing, and it just instantly took all their money. Like some of them, stealing like 100 coins at a time. It's just heartbreaking. Read some of these stories. And this is just because people did not understand what code they were running, which had direct access to their private keys. And so this is one of the aspects. Another thing is like how to actually use the wallets. And a lot of that is just practice. So with a lot of this, like, most people start using Bitcoin with real money, and they're sort of learning it as they go, which is extremely dangerous. You want to practice when the stakes are low, make your mistakes when they're free, and then then when the stakes are high, you know how to do it. And that's not how most people kind of figure out how to use Bitcoin. So our approach in this class is that we use Bitcoin's test network, which is predominantly used to help developers test their applications. So we use that, where the coins have no monetary value, to help people practice, using wallets. Because there are all kinds of pitfalls, and everyone's got their story about losing some Bitcoins. I've almost lost my first stash of Bitcoins at one point, and many people struggle with this. And so the idea is to practice when the stakes on this test network, and you can sort of do some risky maneuvers because you're not going to lose any coins. It's play money. And then for your real coins, you kind of know what you're doing. And so that's sort of the approach. And there's a lot of things about using wallets that's unclear. Like most of these wallets, you get these seed words, and it's like, well, how do you know how to make use of these seed words like 5 years from now? If you like hide them away and you successfully don't lose them or have them stolen, how can you like turn these seed words into like goods or services 5 years ago, if Bitcoin is 20 years, 10 years from now, if Bitcoin becomes more highly valued? This is something that's it's worthwhile to practice a little bit, so you can sort of simulate, like, overnight, we'll pretend we just hodled these for 5 years. And our wallet file is gone, a whole fresh new computer. How can we turn these seed words, get them into a wallet, or maybe a different wallet than we created them with? And so that's one of the things we'll practice, is how to like recover wallets. And there's a lot of other like more privacy concerns. If you have coins from different sources and you don't want them to mix them, right? So in our class, we have like two classes of coins. We have clean coins and dirty coins, and we try throughout the class not to mix them. And this is sort of tricky. So it's, involves a lot of like labeling each output. And then towards the end of the class, we practice using Wasabi to mix the coins, to actually send all the dirty coins to Wasabi and have them coin joined. So on the other side, whatever nefarious, maybe we got those from an exchange, it's no longer clear where, who currently owns that or where they came from after mixing through Wasabi. And so then we can sort of like use them with our clean coins in principle. And so it's going through some of the practicing a little bit with using some of these privacy technologies as well. And doing Wasabi on mainnet is sort of scary. You have to put zero point 0.1 Bitcoin into it in order to even try it. And 0.1 Bitcoin is it's $1,000. Like you can't. The minimum you can test it on the main with real Bitcoins is $1,000. So it's unlike Electrum, where you can send it $1, Bitcoin Core, where you can send it $1. In order to try it, you need to put in $1,000. So this approach of using testnet makes it a lot more appealing. You can try these risky, fun things, and if you screw up, it's no big deal. So that's the idea: is practice using these wallets, practice installing them. And we also do like a multi-sig setup, like practice. We try to set up a multi-sig wallet. So you get kind of a sense of what all these different avenues are. And it's just practice.
So, I mean, I was being cognizant of time. I know that we're most people know that listen to this podcast know that I record most of these in the evening, so I don't want to keep you too long. But you mentioned earlier, and I kind of was thinking that we could end the episode on this. Was you mentioned that coding was a form of self sovereignty, and I was wondering if you could kind of. This is something that I've been interested in myself of starting to actually learn, because I am very attracted to that idea of kind of, for lack of a better term, being able to write your own ticket in a way. And I was wondering if you could kind of maybe talk about your experience with coding as a form of self-sovereignty, what's kind of given you and the freedom in your life, and how that kind of fits in as well with the Moodiversity and kind of building on Bitcoin, but just coding in general.
Yeah, so my experience with it was I was in school, hated it, was doing a big study abroad program because I hated it, just trying to graduate without it being too painful. And I just started, so I studied math because I found it interesting. But the problem with studying math is that there's no like saleable skill at the end of the road. You're good at like dealing with problems, but there's no like specific thing someone can directly plug you into. So you're sort of faced with having to figure that out yourself. And I found that saleable skill in programming. It's like this. It's an extremely saleable skill, right? You can sell your wares as a programmer all over the world. You can, almost every company in the world hires programmers. So it's like I think that the number of programmers doubles every 5 years. It's sort of like it's as future proof as you're going to get, and I think it's also very unregulated. There's no like not many countries have like licensing regimes for programmers, and there's not like seniority. If you're a 15-year-old who's good at it, you can make amazing money just because you're good at it. And this isn't true of probably most occupations, right? Other occupations have like bizarre seniority rules, and you have to climb a big ladder. In programming, it's just like, are you good at it or not? Like, can you do it? And I think that's like sovereignty right there. It's like if you have this skill, you can kind of write your own ticket to a degree. And also, I mean, there's all kinds of business opportunities that are. It's hard to think of many businesses that will be created in the future that won't use software in some way. So I think it also lends itself to entrepreneurship, which is another form of sort of self-sovereignty, where you can produce an asset that writes your ticket for you, and you don't even have to work anymore. That's sort of that's the dream, isn't it?
No, absolutely. That's kind of been what's attracted me to that. And I've been looking into doing myself. I've been talking about doing it for like the last year, but I've been looking into coding boot camps and things like that to really kind of delve into it, to kind of, I don't know. I mean, it's very attractive to me to not have to actually work, not well in that way, but in a 9-to-5 traditional job field, and to be able to. Because my main goal has been, since my first child was born, was I want to be able to homeschool them, and especially with coding, that you can, for the most part, kind of create your own schedule in a lot of ways, especially if you do things remotely and freelance work. From a lot of people that I've talked to that do that sort of thing. And that's been really a driving force for me to kind of really want to get into this.
Yeah, I think the modern employment is like broadly incompatible with families, right? You like it's very hard if you have two like wage earners who are working 9 to 5 and having their souls crushed at a in a cubicle. Like, how are you gonna raise like that's not how humans are meant to raise families. Like shipping your kid off to daycare and all that. It's like just sort of incompatible. So having something that gives you more flexibility to spend more time with your kid, or is just sort of you have more freedom. I think that's a lot better. I don't have a family yet, but when I do, that's definitely not going to have a desk job at a Fortune 500. That's for sure.
No, it is definitely not advisable. I have a lot of different goals for where I want to get there, and the way that I want my kids to be raised. So it's just been kind of a slog on trying to do that. But I don't want to keep you too much longer, and I'd like to thank you so much for taking time out of your day, actually night now, and the changes in scheduling. I switched this around a couple times, and I really appreciate you taking time out. How can people find you, and how could they get hold of you?
The easiest way is just on Twitter. Just search Justin Moon. It's Justin Moon with underscores on both sides. That's the easiest way. I'm pretty active on there. I respond to practically every direct message. So message me if you're interested in programming. I'd happily sort of show you some of the discuss some of the options because I just want more people to get involved because I think Bitcoin's going to moon and we need a lot of help getting there.